Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good evening. I was telling Tony I'm actually half awake because I haven't been sleeping. I've been having this sleep deprivation for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, I need, if you have to speak about 1MDB and the 2.6 billion, you can actually do this in your sleep, because it's been like 2-3 years non-stop. Ms. Moderator, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it's always amazed me that every time there is a forum, there's always a big crowd. It just shows how Malaysians just love to laugh at politicians. I don't think you come here to really find out new things. You just want to hear how stupid our politicians are. But on the serious side, I'm actually quite surprised that the public generally was surprised at the extent of the amount of power, the amount of ridicule, and the amount of money that was involved, as if this is a new thing. Those who live long enough would have understood that this is bound to happen. After years and years of serious erosion of independence of public institutions, after years of emasculation of judiciary and agencies, it is bound to happen that when so much power is concentrated in a single man's hands, this kind of things is bound to happen in Malaysia. I kind of understand if the younger generation find it shocking, but I'm sure those who are 40 and above actually feels that it's just a deja vu, it's just a repeat of everything all over again. So let me begin by, I think, answering the question of our forum tonight, the end of rule of law with a question mark, before Gobin actually attempts to answer it. As far as I'm concerned, the rule of law is as good as that a long time ago, It's just that the 1MDB scandal and the 2.6 billion is just a reminder yet again for yet another generation of how bad things can become if Malaysians don't come together and put a stop to this. Because this is not the first time that you see whatever is happening now. In 1987, the attacks on the judiciary in 87 and 88. And then you have in 1998, and that was my awakening of my generation, to see how everything was manipulated and how the public was taken for a ride just because a prime minister has to get rid of his deputy. And you saw that over the years. So if anything, the 1MDB culmination of the last few months, if anything, to me it is a clear sign from God that He is watching. And I think in all His fairness, I think He's trying to tell everyone what goes around comes around. And therefore, I wonder whether Tun Mahathir is watching, or do we have Tan Sri Gani Patail somewhere? For all you know, he's somewhere around there, I wonder, and Tan Sri Muhyiddin watching. I know that Saurav become a hero of sort lately. But I wonder what they feel now, looking back and looking at all those years when they used to have the upper hand, using exactly the same tools and the same tactics at other people. So serve them right, I think. At least, you know. Okay, I mean, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of the scandal. Every time we have a forum and there's sort of some sort of tag team between myself and Tony Pua for the last few years, he will always concentrate on the very much the nitty-gritty of everything. I usually just make fun of Rosmah. So I think he has explained that. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of that. But what I want to concentrate a bit on the financial aspect of it is how it will affect Malaysia as a country and society for many, many, many years after this. Because 1MDB, even if we manage to put a lid to it, even if Najib's promise that rationalization of 1MDB debts will basically cover and put it as a thing of the past, the financial impact and the financial repercussion of 1MDB will drag into many, many years in the future. But I'm sure, you know, a lot of people, most Malaysians basically know the gist of 1MDB, one way or another. You know, how money was taken supposedly for investments. We never see the investments. And then all the jokes about whether it was money and units and so on. I think anyone understands it now. And so far, the attempts by Najib or UMNO to explain it has really backfired. Each time they try to explain it differently, it will just spin a new set of jokes. And that's why I think if there was one silver lining in all of this, I think UMNO, because of the failure to explain 1MDB nicely and coherently to the public, UMNO themselves had to change their own spin master. And I think that was a big blessing, because now we don't have Datuk Ahmad Maslan anymore as the spin master. We have Anwar Musa now. And that's because I think partly that's the unintended effects of 1MDB. I want to share slightly before I go into the detail of the financial impact. I want to share the other impact, how 1MDB has made Malaysia so recognizable and so popular or unpopular, depending which side you are, overseas and anywhere in the world. I was actually in the UK in the last 2-3 weeks. You know, I had a lot of sessions with students, and then I had a lot of meetings with MPs, and I caught up with some of my old colleagues when I used to work in London. Usually in the past, every time we catch up, the conversation about Malaysia is always about food, nasi lemak and stuff. It's about beaches, where to go, and slightly about weather and so on. This time around, it was very different. Conversation about Malaysia is the excitement about what will happen next with your Prime Minister, you know. Because to them, this is like a soap opera. You can never expect what happens next, and it is, I think, the funniest soap opera to them. So it gives me the impression, it's like, I feel like in a much the same way we look at British, and Mr. Bean reminds us of everything that is funny about British. I think now British, the whole world looks at Malaysia, and Najib kind of have become our Mr. Bean. That explains, you know, everything that is wrong in this country. And someone makes a remark, you know, my friend in London actually made a remark and say that if there is any consolation to Najib, depending on how this whole soap opera will end, if there is any consolation, whatever happens to him, he can be sure of that, you know, this story, his story about 1MDB, about the 2.6, but how is the kind of story that will make a big Hollywood box office. So he can write the script and give it to Jolo and his son to produce as the next Hollywood movies. He can retire financially comfortable with that. I mean, that's the kind of jokes that we are subjected to when you travel overseas. You know? So if you go overseas, don't claim that you are from Malaysia. I can always say that I'm from Thai, actually. Okay, now let's go back to the financial impact at the macro level beyond what Tony has explained. As much as I say, we are no longer surprised by the magnitude of everything. I suppose 2 or 3 years back, 42 billion ringgit was a lot of money. People were surprised. Now I think everyone sort of have accepted that we have lost 42 billion ringgit. Najib, I'm sure, is a bit glad because the public has come to terms that it's a 42 billion ringgit. But what I'm most concerned, and this is where we should play our role, we should not stop explaining the magnitude of impact to future generations of that 42 billion of ringgit, because the price that we pay for that will definitely go beyond our lifetime. I see quite a lot of you who are much older than us. You should be glad because it's not your problem after this. I mean, Tony is, I think it might actually, he might expire first as well. But you know, the young ones, good luck to you, because a lot of this 42 billion and the liability that we inherit to future generation definitely goes beyond 22, 25. Some, I think, will go as far as 30 years. And it's not just about the actual bond or loans or liability that future generations have to inherit. The fact that all this 42 billion has to come at the point when economically we are very weak, that will have again a series of problems to future generation, because at the time when we are supposed to go through a structural reform of our economy, because we are stuck now, you know, for future generation, we should be concentrating on how to upgrade whatever financial resources that we have. We should use it to absorb whatever changes that we need to go through these few years. But we can't, because 42 billion basically just intertwine everything, so much so that it takes the country's ability to go through economic changes. It robs us of that, and because of that we are stuck. And let me explain how this happens, you know. Because we are coming to a junction, economic junction, when we are running out of fiscal space. You know, 10 years before, the prime ministers before actually have a bit more freedom to play around, because you have the stability of the palm oil bringing revenue to the country, you have the crude oil giving steady revenue, you have the growth of electronic and manufacturing. All those basically provided us the economic buffer for us to experiment, to make changes and so on. So they could commit scandals before. That's why apologists for Najib usually argue that what's the big deal, because previous scandals by Mahathir was bigger in terms of size. Actually, I don't dispute that. That's correct. Of course, if you take whatever had happened during Mahathir's time and you take into account the inflation and so on, of course, the amount of financial mismanagement during Mahathir's reign obviously is more than 42 billion. But there is one big difference. During those years, we had the fiscal space that we could absorb whatever was lost in Forex game of the 1991. It was estimated about 30 billion was lost because of the Forex game. We had the capacity to absorb that without really affecting our fiscal position and economic growth. We can't anymore. We have come to the point that because we are running out of fiscal space, we come to the point that 42 billion ringgit has begun to affect all the leverage that federal government could have had. We are now denied the ability to finance government at cheap loans. We can't anymore because 1MDB has brought very negative perspective of Malaysian economy and market. If you issue bonds now, obviously it is at higher rate than what we could have gotten. We can't, for example, experiment, as I say, because the amount of reserve is no longer there. The international market sentiment is against us, and therefore investors are not coming in. And because of that, 1MDB is like the eye of hurricane that really sucks all these problems and bring it together, so much so that you can already feel the effect on normal Malaysians. For the first time, I think, Malaysian government had to respond through new taxation to this kind of problem. I don't think you have seen a new tax introduced for so many years. It is only during Najib's time that despite all the risks and unpopularity of GST, he had to introduce GST. Because he just had no choice. Because given that we were running out of fiscal space, and that was contributed largely because of the 1MDB scandal and the way they managed 1MDB scandal, the country now has to grapple with the effect of GST at the time when the country and the public are not ready yet for it economically. And that's why, and this is, I think, where we ought to explain it further, that the impact of 1MDB is going to last really long. And it's going to deprive future generation of a vibrant economy, because our failure to reform our economy structurally now, because of the problems with 1MDB, obviously will set Malaysia 10-15 years behind compared to our competitors, Vietnam. Obviously we are far behind Korea and so on. That perspective is very important, because that's precisely what Najib and Rosmah want us to forget. That it's exactly the role of Arul Kandar. I wish he's here so that we can have a debate, but that's I think what he's hired for. He's hired to really quickly wrap up everything, put it somewhere, and very quickly Najib is banking on Malaysians' short memory, so that then within 5-6 months we will forget about it. If we are not careful, that's exactly what will happen. Because that has happened over and over again. And I can't blame Najib and Rosmah for feeling that, look, if Mahathir got away with so many things in the last 22 years of his rule, obviously I can get away as well, using exactly the same approach, the same method, because you can't fault them if they think that Malaysians never change. And this has happened over and over and over again. So that's why, I will take it upon myself to make sure that we have to translate the financial impact of 1MDB to younger ones, because they will bear the brunt of this, so that they can understand, regardless of what happens to 1MDB after this, the negative impact is irreversible. We will have to pay the price. It's just a question that if you are older, you pay less price. If you are younger, good luck to you. Okay. Then, the last part of what I wanted to share with you tonight, if that's the case, What is left? Because this is the stage where our society and the public is at now. It's a stage of helplessness. It's a stage of, what can we do, ayah? He even sacked the AG and so on. He's so powerful. Anytime you want to rally the public and the crowd for something, usually what you get now is defeatism. That there's nothing much we can do anymore. He's basically, he's in control of everything. Let me remind all of you, I think some of us, Sonny Phua, myself, and a series of other politicians, opposition politicians especially, have started talking about 1MDB as early as 2011. In the first 3 or 4 years, nobody gave a damn, I tell you. I was, he was like a mad Chinese and I was like a mad Malay, talking to respective community who just couldn't care less about it. A lot of the UMNO people were basically attacking us with the same viciousness as Najib is attacking us now, but only when Mahathir began to speak against 1MDB, then the tide turns a bit. Now, people ask this question: why is it that it took Mahathir to basically turn things around? I don't know about Tony. I have no problem whatsoever with that. In fact, I think that has always been the case. That has always been the strategy. Because if there is one thing, the one thing that will make the elite of UMNO think or decide a different course of action, if they feel that they are going to lose power. We may say, or we may laugh at Ahmad Maslan, Anwar Musa and the kind of court jesters around Najib now, but there are still, I think, UMNO elites who understand and who can read the ground. So as in anything before, the objective is always to hammer it non-stop. Even if the public doesn't understand it, at least the UMNO elite understand it enough of the colossal impact to UMNO that they could lose election because of this. Because once that happens, then the internal strife begins. And that's the whole thing about 1MDB. And obviously, Mahathir eventually came to his sense and realized that if this not attended to, then it may be the end of UMNO, and the rest, as I say, is history. Now, we are at exactly the same junction. There's a feeling of helplessness. People feel that, it's not going to go anywhere. I tell you, do exactly the same. Just hammer it. Hammer and hammer and hammer, because eventually Zaid Hamidi will say, I am going to dish Najib and Rosmah because they will drag us. Because that is the nature in UMNO. You hammer them enough, people will throw the liability off the ship, because all that matters to them is to stay in power. So if people ask me, how do you get rid of Najib when everything seems to be in his control? Well, of course, he cannot be removed by law. I don't think so. Any prime minister in Malaysia has always been removed politically. None of them has ever stepped down voluntarily. None of them has stepped down democratically. They have always been removed politically. And when it comes to politics, who has the most upper hand? You. You have the most upper hand, because you vote, you are the public. And you have to understand that. This is a game for the long haul. So while the 42 billion all done and dusted, there are 3 or 4 remnants of that 42 billion that will have a big impact on the psyche and psychology of the voters. What are these? And these are the issues that we have to concentrate and hammer and salvage, because eventually it will shake the UMNO elites around Najib in the same way that it has shaken Mahathir and the old guys. What are these issues? Number one, is the sale of the national assets by Najib to cover 1MDB. It's extremely emotional, especially to the voters group that matters most, which is the Malay. They may not want to know the nitty-gritty of the details, but when Najib sold EDRA and went against government's own regulation not to allow a majority stake of a utility company to a foreign holding, I think he crossed the line as far as the Malay psyche is concerned. That's crossing the line. So stopping EDRA, or what we do in order to stop EDRA sale, and there is still a window for that, because while the sales and purchase has been signed, the conditions precedents have not been fulfilled. And I think EDRA has until June to fulfill conditions precedents, which I was informed one of the conditions precedent actually falls within our control, which is one of the condition precedent is that EDRA must guarantee an extension of lease of one of the lands on which one of the power unit resides in Selangor. I think it's one in Kuala Langat, one of that. I do not have the full detail, but I was informed reliably that one of the conditions precedent is the extension of lease, which then falls under the purview of the state government of Selangor. I was informed by MB Datuk Seri Azmin Ali that he will do everything in his power to block that extension so that that conditions precedent is not met. Okay, that's number one. The other conditions precedent, the other sales that is extremely emotional to the public is the sales of Bandar Malaysia to IWH CREC consortium, because it's land and it also involved Tabung Haji. Tabung Haji put a lot of money there, so it's very emotional to especially the Malay voters. That also comes with one conditions precedent which we can try to frustrate, because for the sales to be completed, Tabung Haji as the bond holder, sukuk holder that was issued by Bandar Malaysia, will have to give its consent to the sale. Well, a lot of us are depositors in Tabung Haji. I think we have a right. I have put forth a question to the Prime Minister in the first week of March, in the next sitting of Parliament, for him to confirm whether or not Tabung Haji has decided to give the consent or not. Either way, once I get the confirmation from the Prime Minister, I intend to bring this to court and file an injunction to get Tabung Haji not to give the consent, so that the condition precedent is not met. And finally, the other parts which are still extremely emotional to the voters are the outstanding amount of money owed by 1MDB to all the public investment institutions. I think 1MDB owed Tabung Haji about 3 billion ringgit. 1MDB owed KUAP, Kumpulan Wang Amanah Pencen, about 5 billion, including the 4 billion. Well, okay, the 4 billion is technically now is Ministry of Finance, but it started off as 1MDB. 1MDB owed a small amount to EPF, a few hundred millions, through JIMA, which is now inherited by CGN, Chinese Nuclear Corporation. And 1MDB also owed, and this is not known so far, also owed 900 million to SOCSO. You can imagine how great it is to go to the poor people and say, you know how difficult it is for you to get 10,000 from SOCSO? And you know how much SOCSO gave to 1MDB? 900 million. So I'm telling Najib, wait until we hit towns with that, and we go to smaller towns and we talk to the, working class who struggle and who have all these issues with SOCSO all this while. I think we will have to continue to push for this, because once we do this, my hope is, while this happen at every generation, scandal like this, abuse of institutions like this happen at every generation, I hope for the first and the last time, this is going to be that one generation that will be remembered differently. I don't want 30, 40 years from now, people talk about 2015 and 1MDB and everything in the same way that we talk about 1987, 1998, which was things happened so badly, everyone knew it was wrong, but there was nothing we could do. I hope that 20, 30 years from now, people say that, looking back, the 2015 was that one moment that every Malaysian rallied together and get rid of a despot. And that changed everything. So, thank you very much. Don't worry, we have a long script. I think Najib has his own script for his blockbuster movie. We have our own script with our own blockbuster movie. Thank you very much.